Well, hello everyone. One of my favorite times to be with you after an incredible weekend. Let's talk about getting rid of stress. Hello everyone and welcome to the beginning of the last days. My name is Laura-Lynn Thompson. Everything go, all systems go. There's a lot happening here that JT and I have to make happen. Behind the scenes, it's just, it's a bit of a schmoz. Nonetheless, everything is going on. We think about, all the things that we've been through in the last 4 years and just getting a show up and running. It's a bit like a takeoff, for one of those moon rockets. But we're off and it's all absolutely wonderful. What I love to do every single show is read to you from my dad's Bible. It does a couple of things. It just brings his beautiful legacy to my remembrance because he was such an incredible man. And I miss him every day. 2.5 years ago, approximately, he left us and he got graduated into heaven. And he has underlined this Bible, which is very precious. I will guard this for the rest of my life, and I hope my grandchildren do. I hope that it goes on from generation to generation. This was great-grandpa Freeman's Bible because it's so full of beautiful things. But he's underlined here, Psalms 133, "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garments." And then it goes on about the dew of Hermon and all of that. But how incredible it is. This is like this whole Psalm, Psalms 133. It's 3 verses and it's wrapped around how important it is to be together. And what happened this last few years is we got isolated, didn't we? Like, whoops, sorry about that. Maybe we can take that out in editing. What happened this last few years was that we lost contact. They tried to destroy a few things for us, didn't they? They tried to destroy the fact that we need to be together. We need to hug one another, greet one another with a holy kiss, that we need community and we need each other. And it has brought on its own special level of circumstances. I've often said that it seems like the entire world is kind of suffering from PTSD. If you find out that there's something that could harm all of humanity, and it could be anywhere, it could be on any door handle, it could be in any store, any public place that you go to, that puts a lot of stress on you because you're wondering if your life is in danger. And so there's that kind of stress. And then there's also trauma that we go through in life that's hurtful, and that we go through different circumstances and we have to know how to heal. Well, lucky for us, blessed are we today that we would have Michele Smith joining us. She is an advanced certified trauma and resilience practitioner. She has her master's in the field of complex trauma and 24 years experience with survivors of the traumatic death of a loved one. She is in private practice and the founder and president of the Aaron's Society. Interesting that I read about Aaron today, the healing oil going over Aaron's beard. Focus on trauma. Michele also informs schools, works with groups and children, and provides training for professionals. Michele, welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us today.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm wondering, how do you, not be traumatized by some of the things that you've had, some pretty incredible situations and clients, I guess, that you needed to help through some trauma. How do you keep that off of yourself before we get into helping all of the viewers?
I actually get asked that question quite a bit. First of all, I have been traumatized myself. That was almost 14 years ago. And I had to, there isn't a lot of people that specialize in it. So I was really trying to navigate, the whole trauma experience. And it was really, severe trauma. It's a very blunt force kind of trauma. And I was trying to navigate, and the trauma sort of kept happening for about a year afterwards. And but eventually it led me into studying trauma. But so knowing what to do to keep that vicarious trauma from affecting me. Like, people will often ask me, well, with all the stories you hear, do you cry a lot? And I'll say, no, I'm Irish, I swear a lot. And
One way or
I know
another.
it's coming out, yeah. I said, but sometimes I do, yes, of course, but I'm more likely to pace the floor and curse underneath my breath. And but but it's also, having been through trauma, that actually, oddly enough, helps me to not suffer secondary wounding. I also recognize that this is not my story; it's somebody else's story, and I don't, as much as I'm there for them and to take them through that journey. I don't have any right to their story. And
Mm.
so largely, if we're writing out our stories and we focus only on, for example, memories that are good from the earliest memory, and we start writing them out, and then we do a narrative of this, we usually find that that's our God-given story, and almost everything else that happens to us in life is usually somebody else's story and isn't even ours anyway.
Mm.
And
Michelle.
so we go ahead.
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
Well, before we got started, we were kind of, talking a little bit, and you had seen my personal story of my trauma, and I've shared it online. And it strikes me that you said something. You said about your whole world like blowing apart. And that can happen to different people for different reasons. Some of those that are mentioned in your bio, like terrible traumas, the death of someone you love, something catastrophic happening. It can also be a failure in your own personal life. It could be your husband leaving you. It could be your wife abandoning the family. So these are things that bring you to a place where you don't know how you're going to survive the next little bit. So is that the trauma that you're mainly dealing with?
I deal with every causal factor. Trauma is very subjective. And so what might traumatize one person might not traumatize another person. My trauma was actually the death of my son. That's how it started, was the death of my youngest son. And so that it traumatized me beyond anything you could imagine. And so there I was dealing with a lot of people who'd had traumatic death and never dreaming this was going to, that something was going to happen that caused the death of my son. So, my youngest son. So I think it can be sexual abuse. It can be an incident in childhood. It can be long-term abuse. It can be so many things that cause. COVID was brutal. I mean, that was like having a trauma tsunami, and it's still ongoing. And so we're having all of these kind of long-term things happening, and then we're seeing secondary wounding, because we're seeing, once it happened, all of these other things closing in on us so fast your head would spin, that aren't making sense, and causing people a lot of distress.
So when you're chatting with folks and you need to help them through something very, very difficult, what are some key things maybe you could help us with? Maybe also, at the end we'll let people know how they can contact you if they need some support at this time, because many people do. And in fact, I have a lady who is in touch with me who's going through a extremely stressful situation, and it just seems like when you're going through that, there's nothing else you can really think about. Like, it consumes, and that's part of maybe it can be problematic. You can't get past, what's happened. But describe for me maybe some good things that you could share with the audience that would help them if they're going through something.
staying grounded in the moment, because it's exactly like you say. What happens is the trauma actually causes almost like a barrier. It overwhelms everything else. And so if you are in a situation that other people would view as good, for example, you might not be able to see that because you're overwhelmed with the traumatic experience. It also gets stuck in your nervous system. So when the body, when something bad happens, the brain goes danger, the body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, getting you ready to run or fight or freeze or whatever you're going to do. And if you can't do any of those, that's stuck there now. So we have to try to get that trauma going full cycle because it's overwhelming everything else. And so some of just, kind of, it's very extensive, but, catching yourself, staying grounded. Well, what's happening right this moment? Am I safe right this moment? What's going on around me? Because generally you'll find people are trapped in either something, their heads are trapped in either something that has happened or something they're afraid is going to happen. Like, I'm going to have a trauma attack and I know it. And this is, and then they set it off because of their own fear. Well, trauma is fear trapped in the nervous system. And so you don't want to be playing with that. Sensory walks, going for a walk, but only concentrating on, what do I see? What do I smell? What do I hear? What do I feel? And so on. Writing a good narrative. There are many sort of physical things that I'm able to give people that will help them to feel safe and calm that nervous system so they can think. Because when that nervous system is in high alert like that, the cognitive part of the brain where we think, that unplugs, just like as if you unplugged your computer. You're not thinking anymore. You're shut down. So, and all you're doing is this fear response is happening. So teaching people how to control that chemical response so they can think, and also overlook at, taking a strong look at particular perceptions that might be lies, about oneself or about others or their environment or that kind of thing. And they get to be very environmentally perceptive. Like when somebody is hypervigilant, they're scanning for danger all the time. I mean, it takes a lot of energy to be traumatized. If you ever watch children, they don't miss a darn thing. I mean, they used to come into my home and walk up my stairs, and I would think they're following me into my living room. They're chatting away, and all of a sudden they'll stop dead, turn their heads, and walk across the living room and turn an ornament back the way it was the week before I dusted. They don't miss a darn thing. They are so hypervigilant. And so this scanning all the time for danger, all the time. So that's there. It's stuck. It causes a lot of very diverse sort of symptomology, depending on the person and their story and cause and so on. Everybody's different, but so building and their resilience skills, our spirituality. A lot of people go into spiritual struggles, almost right away. Our ability to master things, our community, our altruism, are the things that we draw on to be able to deal with adverse life events. Maybe 1, 2, 3, all been damaged. So I'm going to take them, I'm going to build them all back up again. So they're strong enough to be able to deal with those adverse. So that's kind of the stage 1 before I get into memory processing.
Wow.
And then
I'll
go there.
I'll just say that, I went for a walk recently down by the river near our home. So it's a fair drive, but I get there, it's a big empty parking lot. There's one truck at the other end of the parking lot, and down there is a guy with a mask on walking around outside. And I realized, like, this is what they did to us. This guy, there's no one around for 50 yards, and he's afraid. He's so traumatized and fear. The other thing I think too, Michele, is the worst part for me going through something that was very traumatic, and it's in my book, Relentless Redemption. But thank you for sharing, by the way, about your personal difficulty, to say the least, with the loss of your son. I don't actually know what's worse than that in life, or how we get past that. I don't know. I know for me, my my issue had to do with my own personal failure, and my trauma was, I don't think that I'll ever get past this. And that's a huge lie. You will. You will get healing from the Lord for whatever is coming at you. But the enemy's lie is you will never recover.
It is, and I really admire you for bringing that one up, because I remember those feelings so well. I went, because my trauma didn't end there. Right on the heels of the death of my son, which was very traumatic, I learned within about 3 weeks that my husband was leading a whole life I knew nothing about. And so the trauma kept happening, and I had to kind of open the door and show him out. And so there I was, alone with two young girls. I wasn't able to work. I was too traumatized. I was so grief ridden, and I'm unraveling this like a spool of thread. So it was just as if I was being
Wow.
constantly shot at, and but it's interesting because, and I didn't think I was coming out of it, Laura-Lynn, I didn't. I thought I'm done. Like and then I'm thinking, well, I obviously I married somebody I shouldn't have. I completely shamed the Lord. I shamed myself. I'm so dead in the water. How can I even, like, a lie, but it does go through your head, and you do start to struggle. We all want to make, really good and appropriate choices all the time. I wish that was the case. It isn't the case. Our life is just, we're tripping and falling on our way up all the time. But the key thing is that is a very healthy yardstick. We are comparing ourselves to the very best, not the very worst, which is happening right now. It's like a lot has happened since COVID, but most people are how they like, I don't do a single screening where I found anybody who said that they weren't a good person. People always say, well, clearly it feels good to rate ourselves as good people, and most people will if you give them that. But it's because we compare. Well, the jerk down the street does this, and this. I don't do that stuff, so therefore I'm a good person. So our yardstick is a bit off in how we are judging whether we're a good person. And this is rapidly now in this culture becoming, that yardstick is becoming, if I can call something that is evil good, I can rate myself as the highest humanitarian. I can
Wow.
convince to kill themselves, and I could rate myself as, so
Good point.
yeah, so we don't, like, if you want to be a star hockey player, you're going to look at the best hockey player to get there, and you're going to strive to get there no matter how hard that is. And that's kind of what our Christian worldview is. We're going to strive. We have the highest of what's good, and that's what we're headed for. So not the worst. And so we have a very, very, very odd and not good yardstick by which we judge ourselves as good
And
people.
then and then it strikes me that if you get to that place we were talking about where your world explodes,
Yes.
you bottom out, then you can be tempted to compare yourself to the best, and so then you just can never measure up like the perfect people. That's, I talk in my book about going to church for these years that I was in a depression and shame, that all the perfect people were there. They were only married one time. They had perfect children. One was going to be a school teacher. One was going to be a doctor. The worst kid was going to be a lawyer. And that was their family. And they had it all together, and they did daily devotions, and, they greeted at the door and taught Sunday school classes at church. And I walk in the mess and the broken person, And so in those days, all I could see was the perfect people, and I would never be enough.
Well, they weren't. Let's start with that. You start peeling open those perfect people's lives, and you would be
Mhm.
surprised what you're going to find. It's not that they were perfect. They were
So
not.
true.
I mean, I am counseling at church because it's very important to me to try to help make God's people strong at this point in time in life. And they're not there. That does not exist. We're all struggling. We fall on our faces, we pick ourselves up, because striving, using the best as a yardstick, that's hard getting there. That's no easy task. So if you start looking behind what's going on with those perfect people, as I have the opportunity often to do, you're going to find that's not what's going on there. They're struggling as hard as you.
Yes, yes.
They just
And I've come to see that in the years that passed, the perfect people, there was a couple of divorces in the perfect people as well. I was not the last scandalous story.
exactly.
I began to be, okay, I'm getting distance now, from all of that. But that wasn't the real healing for me. For me, and I'd love you to share about what does actually heal us. But for me, the healing was understanding the power of God's forgiveness and redemption. There was no place past that. For others who might be going through, a husband who is not what you thought, and so you're having a big marital difficulty, getting
Yeah,
healing can be different for different people.
it is very different because with a pastor once said to me, "Oh, well, with what you do, you're hunting for forgiveness. Like you deal with a lot of sexual abuse people and so on, people abused as children. So forgiveness is your goal, right?" And I said, "Not necessarily." And he looked at me shocked, and I said, "I'll tell you what." I said, "You take a sexual abuse client." And the first words out of your mouth are forgiveness, and I'll look at my watch and see how long it takes them to kill you.
Wow.
Because I said that's not where you want to start. Because especially for young people, I said they're interpreting that you're telling them that they have to say this is okay. But I said what I do head for is canceling the debt, which is what Christ acts in essence did for us. And I'll say, look, you don't want if behind every person's adverse event, no matter what it is, we've got that person did it, they need to fix it. And I'll say, you don't want somebody who did it fixing this. you you need to cancel the debt, tell them they don't owe you a darn thing, nothing. They have a nice life, you have a nice life, and hopefully never the twain shall meet again. So cancel that debt. So that's where I'll head for. Which is in essence the same thing, but I don't bring up words like that to them because it look at you if I had a nickel for everyone that said, look, I know my pastor told me I have to forgive. Well, here I am back here 5 years later, and I've been trying. Look, this is not, because they think it means that they have to say this was okay, and it's not okay at all. It's not okay to be sexually abused when you're a child. And someone said, "Well, I got in trouble from my pastor because I'm angry." I said, "Why would you think you wouldn't be angry?" Wow. Like these are now you can't stay there, but why do we suggest such things to people, like have a right to be angry about such a horrible thing? We should all be outraged.
So that's an
And
important part of it is allowing yourself to experience the anger. The Word of God does say, "Be angry and sin not." So be
exactly.
angry, but then I think of the process as well with the Holy Spirit helping you to come to terms with how to release. Speak to me a little bit about what happens if you stay in unforgiveness, because this can be a very detrimental to you personally. It doesn't end up hurting the other person maybe at all, but it really hurts you if you don't get past it.
I'll tell you what happened, and it's really interesting that you bring that one up because I was sitting in a group of actually it was sexual abuse. They'd been sexually a group that had sexually abused as children or young people, and they were really on a roll that day. And I had a whiteboard there and a marker, and I said, "Oh, okay, you guys, you know, what do you think your perpetrator should be suffering?" They said, "Okay, he should feel remorse." And I'm writing all this down. Remorse. He should be humiliated. He should feel this. He should feel shame. He should feel, and I had quite a list by the time they wore themselves out. And I finally said, "Okay, you guys all done?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "So this is what your perpetrator should be feeling, right?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "So how come you guys are feeling this?" And that's precisely what happens when we stay there. We wind up, look, evil is an incredibly interesting thing. Not only will it perpetrate against, it will leave the victim holding the bag. It's incredible. And I'll say, give back all the emotional repercussions that are not yours to bear. Give them back to the perpetrator. They're not
Mm.
yours. And so, so when I said, well, how come you guys are feeling this? There was just this silence in there, like they're trying to figure this out. I said, you know, getting to the point of forgiveness, actually, that's what happens. We wind up not just having, being perpetrated against or being victimized there's victims and there's victims, but being victimized, but we wind up carrying all the things, all the emotional, spiritual, and everything repercussions of it that the perpetrator should be wearing. And I said, if you do that, he gets to walk free. You're agreeing to carry all of this. Stop it. We got to give it back. So if we don't, if we can't get, we need to get people to. I don't have trouble getting people to a place of counseling the dead, because I will explain all that process to them and say
Yes.
and they don't know that the way they're feeling is actually, oh man, I'm wearing what the perpetrator should be wearing. I said, did you do something wrong? No. Why
Mm.
are you wearing it? So so it's getting them to the point of understanding they're wearing somebody else's stuff.
When is the moment that you need to assess maybe a family member and suggest that beyond, dealing with it personally, that they need to actually see a counselor such as yourself? Do you see, and of course, I'm going to ask a question that you need to say, yes, of course, it's very important to see somebody because this is what you do. But I think it is when you get stuck somewhere, and even children and adults need a skilled person to get them quiet enough to begin assessing, how do I get past what is really, really destroying my current peace?
Exactly. Well, trauma is very specific in its symptomology, and there actually have been clients that I have assessed, and I've said, I understand that you've been through this, and this is really hard for this has been a hard time for you, but you're not traumatized, and so therefore, you probably do better off with this kind of counselor, because I treat trauma. Now, almost all my clients are traumatized, of course, and mostly people that come to me, it would be hard for anyone hearing their story to even imagine why they wouldn't be traumatized. But and especially since COVID, it's just unbelievable. But there have been prior to COVID, we actually saw quite a bit of that. Everybody who went through an adverse life event thought they were traumatized, and many weren't. They felt rotten, and it was a rotten thing that happened to them, but they weren't exactly exhibiting trauma symptoms. They just felt bad, and they could use some help to helping them walk through it, but they didn't necessarily need a trauma specialist.
Do you think en masse, after what we've been through, that there's aspects of us all having been traumatized, and that we're globally going through recovering, not just from what we were worried about, which was a virus that would kill us, but the way that it was treated by the governments, and what they did to our children, what they did to our lives. Certain things for me were very disturbing, that we lost our sense of, this is a joy to be alive, and we live in the best country in all of the planet, Canada. It's so wonderful. I can get a Slurpee and a coffee at a coffee shop anytime I want, and all of a sudden we actually couldn't. And at times we couldn't even drive to where we wanted to go.
The answer to that is yes. I think everybody was affected, everyone, and a lot of stuff that we saw wasn't even new trauma; it was old trauma. I mean, when you've had somebody who's been traumatized before, it doesn't have to be the same trauma. You only have to make them feel the same way. You helpless, victimized. I can't run, I can't fight, and bang, right into traumatic reaction. They're going. And so we saw a lot of that, and but everybody was affected in sort of some way or another, because the very basis, of course, of trauma is a threat to safety, even if it's perceived threat or a threat to a loved one's safety. Well, COVID was a threat to safety. So we had this explosion of traumatic reaction. And the last time I talked to you, Laura-Lynn, or maybe it was a tiny form, but we talked a little bit. The mask mandates were still on, and I remember having told you, well, you know, when they lift the mask mandates, nothing's going to happen. And every time I said that, people said, "What?" I said, "Nothing's going to happen. People will still wear their masks. It's going to take a long, long time." And we're still seeing it today. And that's exactly what did happen. We're still watching people driving down the road with their masks on and so on. And gradually, we saw some, sort of removing them over time, but we're still seeing, and we're still seeing people pushing them to boot. I said, because trauma doesn't work like that. It doesn't go away just because the threat does. Because it's stuck now in the nervous system. You've got fear stuck there. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of what we're seeing. But even people, like, I tried really hard to ensure that there was no sort of fear basis in my home. We did very well. But to even suggest that that we all weren't affected by it would be ridiculous. I mean, it wasn't just the threat, like everything, the way that people were pummeled and degraded, dehumanized, because they weren't going to buy into this nonsense, and they weren't going to, and so now we've got a lot of wounding, because of that. People lost family. I'm still dealing with a lot of that. People really devastated because they lost family, and during so really huge effects from that. And then since then, I mean, prior to COVID, we had educators used to tell me, prior to COVID, we had one, maybe if you're lucky, one transgender per school. And after COVID, we got like one per classroom. And I said, yeah, that's because in my textbooks, gender dysphoria is listed as a trauma symptom. And I said, so what are you guys doing? Like, I said,
Interesting.
yeah, call it what you want, but I said, I'm happy to show you. So I said, but now we're inundated with foolish things. Well, the frontal lobe, where we reason and we problem solve and we come to conclusions and long-term consequences and so on, that does not fully develop until a person is 25 years old. And so here we are. That is a scientific fact. It does not fully develop until we're 25 years old. And here we are using ridiculous things like mature minor. Well, that's not possible. That brain does not fully develop until they're 25 years old. And so why are you hitting children? Look, you can't access something that you don't have. For girls, it's usually about 23, 24. For boys, 25, 26. So the average age is about 25 before that part, the thinking, all those higher cognitive functions, the thinking part of the brain actually does not fully develop until people are 25. So, why do we keep saying stupid things like that? While they're mature at what? They're it was like, go look it up, for crying out loud. Nobody's brain fully develops until then, and the way that, look, if you went to court, Laura-Lynn, and you were in a custody battle, coming between another parent and their child unjustly could cost you your children. It's called parental alienation, and yet we're seeing it all over the place. The nasty effects of coming between, being an uninvited guest between a child and their parent, has incredibly devastating effects. That's why they don't permit it in a court of law, because they understand there are some pretty devastating long-term effects from it. And yet, look, we have teachers doing it, we have government doing it, we have doctors doing it sometimes. here's the interesting thing. As I said to somebody the other day, I don't have a reputation for not being blunt, so but it's my perspective. So here we go. I said to somebody the other day, well, teachers aren't psychologists. They aren't masters at sex education. They aren't anything. That's where this started, is sex education in school. And you can go get the pill and you have to tell mom and dad. So we started right there. But I said, they don't have a degree in this. Doctors, medical doctors, and I'm not undermining what GPs do. I mean, wonderful. I have a great GP, so I'm not undermining, but they are diagnosing mental illnesses and prescribing some pretty heavy antipsychotics and so on. Well, that's not their field. I personally think it should be illegal for them to do that. One psychiatrist said, look, 50% of those diagnoses are wrong and the other 50% are incomplete because they're medical doctors. They're not mental health practitioners. And then we have government who are prescribing for young kids safe drugs with no parental permission. Where'd you guys get your degree? Have you ever talked to an addict that you're doing that kind of thing? So in Canada, it would appear none of us stay in our own lane. You know, if you're just, I'm just kind of going, well, how did you wind up, stay in your own lane? You're not, why are you, why are you? So we have all of this happening with people. And in the meantime, every one of them is alienating parents and children with their nonsense. And that causes huge stuff happening in communities. It causes cracks in community involvement. And if we are going to get anywhere, in my view, if we're going to get anywhere in straightening this stuff out, it's going to be in our communities first. When our communities start getting strong and, bonding and so on, they're going to stand up and say, not in this community or not. We all saw what happened with Gander, right? During 9/11. When people are given the option to be able to give and the freedom to give, they will give until it hurts. But people don't like having things forced down their throat, and they don't like having things taken from them.
Wow. So, tell me, people are going to want to know how to get a hold of you, Michele, and how they could maybe benefit from just dealing with some things. Because when we do finally deal with it, we get free. And I know I got free. It took a very miraculous, but I also had a fair amount of, I went to different counselors at that time. I talked through things, and then that combined with the power of the living God got me through everything. So how do people get a hold of you?
Well, on my website, which I think is up there, I think is my phone number as well as my email address. And you can certainly email me. And I'm usually, within 24 hours anyway. I answer my emails as quick as I can. So I think they're both on there, and you can certainly get a hold of me through there.
Well, that is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to actually recommend you to my friend, and we should do that. Recommend Michele Smith to your friend who you know is going through a hard time. I've written down to let her know, because I do think that you can get stuck in a very bad place, and you just need a little bit of assistance to work yourself out of it. So thank you for this time. I'm sure that we'll talk to you again. Thank you for all you're doing to help the world, to get people through tough things.
Well, thank you too. Thanks so much for having me, Laura-Lynn.
You're welcome. Take care.
You too.
I like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with counseling. Some people, I know my mom and dad's generation, counseling was like not cool. But everyone has a counselor now, so it doesn't matter. And we all really need them. And it really helped me. I describe in the book a couple of times when a counselor asked me a very specific question, and it just made me stop. And then there was one time in particular where he said, how do you see a certain issue? And I described it. And then he said, how does God see this? And then that changed my perspective 100%. And I almost literally had an open vision, like a vision came to my mind as I was thinking about how God truly sees all of this. And it helps us to get free, because we're kind of stuck. A lot of people are stuck. I see it every day in the emails and the communications that I'm getting from people that just feel stuck. Let's get out of being stuck. And more than anything, let's know that God, the Holy Spirit, is our great physician. He is our great counselor, and he will help us to put things in the right perspective so we are healed, whole, and we have a sound mind. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. All right. Well, now for something to think about. Okay, so recently, crazy stuff is going on. Let's look at, could we do the first one is the activist talking, JT, activist Riddhi Patel threatens to kill the mayor of Bakersfield, California.
Hi there, my name is Riddhi Patel. I'm here to speak in support of the City Council introducing a ceasefire resolution, specifically the one United Liberation Front has drafted. I don't have faith that you'll do this. You guys are all horrible human beings, and Jesus probably would have killed you himself. And the thing is, though, it's very clear to me as someone who's been an organizer for the past couple of years that none of you care because you guys don't care about anything happening in Palestine or any other country where oppression occurs because you don't care about the oppression occurring here. And I understand that you guys are all horrible people, but the thing is, 2,300 people being evicted in the last year, those are votes. And you guys, those are votes to win here in Bakersfield. And while you guys parade Gandhi around as a Hindu holiday called Chaitra Navratri starts off this week, I remind you that these holidays that we practice, that other people in the global south practice, believe in violent revolution against their oppressors. And I hope one day somebody brings the guillotine and kills all of you motherfuckers. So regardless of whether you elect people into office, they'll backstab you, they'll let you die, and for that reason, you guys want to criminalize us with metal detectors, we'll see you at your house. We'll murder you.
Next speaker, please.
Lance, followed by Kev, followed by Valeria.
Ms. Patel, that was a threat, what you said at the end, and so the officers are going to escort you out and take care of that.
Whew. Okay, so you can't say stuff like that. There's laws against threatening. Such a very violent thing to have said for somebody that's advocating against what she's calling a genocide or violence in another part of the world. So let's see how it sort of worked out for her.
A deputy public defender entered not guilty pleas on Patel's behalf to 8 counts of threatening a public official and 10 counts of making terroristic threats. She's due back in court later this month.
Okay. Well, that's exactly what should happen. And hopefully the assignment of her punishment is great because we can't have this. A lot is going on right now with people threatening and, you know, death to America. Now, I do have a share here, JT. This last weekend, basically, a bunch of things were happening on the streets. Pro-Palestinian protesters chant death to America while waving Hezbollah flags and light an American flag on fire in protest in New York City. I don't know that this is a great thing that you can just chant violence. I mean, it's so hypocritical that it's shocking. This is hypocrisy to the greatest degree of those that are saying that there's an injustice happening somewhere in the world, but they are then using this violence. I'll tell you, as we watched in this last weekend, as Iran has now entered this brutal assault against Israel, as we're watching, it's pretty clear that they've been funding this war. They're going to fund Hezbollah. and all of this anger now pointing towards Israel. And Israel has had, an opportunity to assess what to do. And I've been listening to the debates back and forth. I don't know how they don't respond, because when you don't respond with discipline, when you don't respond to somebody who hurls thousands of these airborne missiles, and also there were drones, all kinds of things, many different things, and also some came from different parts. I think Yemen and other parts. When you don't respond to that, you look weak, and they might as well think we might as well do it again. And do you know why they thought they could get away with this? Was because Biden is so weak. Biden now, if you don't stand with the greatest democracy in the Middle East, if you don't stand with Israel, who has been absolutely assaulted October 7th, that was the end of all ceasefires. That was the end. Up until then, Israel wasn't assaulting people. Israel wasn't sending bombs anywhere. They were constantly being harassed and harangued, and the Iron Dome was taking down, terrible missiles coming into their country. And everyone was kind of like, showing a lot of grace. But when something like October 7th happens, there's no way to move past this peacefully. There's no way not to deal with the bullies. There's no way not to deal with people that have sworn that they are going to take you out. And that is the manifesto, that is the motto of Hamas in their 1988 charter. They later amended, but it's still the same. Destroy Israel. That's what it's about for them. You cannot negotiate with terrorists. Absolutely not. And so I think we're in a time of grave difficulty. I want to show you now something from Kim Clement. Do you know Kim Clement and his prophetic ministry? One of the most powerful prophets. He went on to be with Jesus. But if you've heard of Kim Clement, he prophesied that Trump would be coming many years earlier. He's prophesied that there will be 2 terms for Trump. He prophesied that there would be 2 indictments, or that impeachments that they would take him up against. Those came true. Trump has had 1 time in office. We'll see if the prophet's words that there will be 2 come to pass in November. But first of all, Netanyahu's. There's a comment from Netanyahu. Let's take this.
I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won, and Israel will prevail. Hamas is also preventing foreign nationals from leaving Gaza altogether. And most despicably, Hamas is holding over 200 Israeli hostages, including 33 children, holding them, terrorizing them, keeping them as hostages. Every civilized nation should stand with Israel in demanding that these hostages be freed immediately and freed unconditionally. I want to make clear Israel's position regarding a ceasefire. Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. Ladies and gentlemen, The Bible says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. This is a time for war, a war for our common future. Today we draw a line between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. It is a time for everyone to decide where they stand. Israel will stand against the forces of barbarism until victory. I hope and pray that civilized nations everywhere will back this fight, because Israel's fight is your fight. Because if Hamas and Iran's axis of evil win, you will be their next target. That's why Israel's victory will be your victory. But make no mistake, regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won, and Israel will prevail. May God bless Israel.
So I want to show you, there's so much misunderstanding. There's a lot of people who write and they say, they have a very bad opinion of Netanyahu. And to those people, whenever somebody writes me about that, I say, would you please send me what your issue is with him? Like, send me the detailed report on war crimes he's committed and things like that. I never hear back from them. But I would say that he is definitely someone who is human, could be fallible, but also dealing with one of the most difficult situations on the planet in history and for all time. Netanyahu has to figure out what to do when people attack him. He has to figure out, attack the country, and him personally, of course. The different sects that are within his own country. Of course, we know that as in Canada, we have those that are pro-Israel, those that are pro-Palestine, Palestinians, there is no Palestine, those that are, for abortion, those are that are against abortion. And so any leader is caught in between these different factions. Some people love you, some people hate you. That's just your own country. This man has to then turn around and deal with the difficulties for all time, for all the world, for everyone that has any opinion on what's happening at all, for those that, have disinformation, misinformation, or are ignorant of the facts, their input, all kinds of people talking about all different kinds of input. He has a very tough job, and you can be sure that if you're called to a position like this, that man is operating under something very special in order to have strength, clarity, wisdom, brilliance in a time of great upheaval. So I want to play this clip from Kim Clement, who is very well known in circles for his accuracy when he was alive. And basically, it's very different. For any of you who haven't seen Kim Clement, he was a musician, a singer. He would play the keyboards. So he would get into the presence of God, and then he would just begin to allow the download of what God was saying. And so this is a prophetic word that he had about Netanyahu.
God, Israel's amazing. They are fighters, and I promise you, watch me, Israel is not who you must worry about. Worry about those enemies that are coming against Israel, because God has always kept Israel. And even when they've been outnumbered. You hear me? Bibi Netanyahu, the prophet that God raised up to speak to the nations. I've got to be careful. God is with you, so what you are planning, go ahead and do, says the Lord. Now I'll say it again because some didn't catch it. Because Bibi Netanyahu is seeing this. He will see this. They know me, they know my prophetic anointing. Bibi Netanyahu, the Lord is with Israel. Go ahead and do what you plan to do. But don't hold back, do it quickly, says the Lord. God just spoke a word to our beloved Israel. Did you hear it? The word was, don't worry, they'll try and attack. But what you have planned, prophet and king Bibi Netanyahu, is the will of the Lord, do it quickly.
So we pray for Israel. We pray for their peace. We pray that God will keep them. And I continue to hear from those that that are pro-Israel thanking me, and those that are pro-Palestine and are concerned about what's going on, over there in the Middle East right now. Let's allow the power of wisdom and the strength of standing, together in unity in Canada, not becoming completely fractured. It's very concerning to me that some of these folks that are doing these crazy rallies are becoming more and more emboldened to be more violent. And that means they've come to our land. They're not just in their land. It's now coming here. And one of the things that I think I put up a post, let me see, maybe we can go to this. Well, first of all, I was showing Christia Freeland is absolutely loving trying on shoes, and with all that she has on her plate right now, I'm glad Christia is taking time to not be too stressed, but to be able to make sure that she's trying on a few shoes here and there. And I think that's just absolutely wonderful. Okay, just take that off there for a second so I can get to my thing. But, when we see things like this happen to this amazing bishop today, yeah, you can if you want. When we see this kind of thing, I'm very concerned that the escalation of our emotions and all of the sides that we're taking is bringing about a very violent world. And thank God that the bishop is recovering and that he's going to be okay through all of this. But this is just not okay. It's not okay. Threatening death to people, it's not okay. And we've had a Canada where we understood that. And I think, one of the things, and if I might just talk from my heart, one of the things that's been the greatest puzzle has been that we're not all united against terrorism. If we cannot discern who the terrorists are, who the bad guys are, and who the good guys are, if we actually can't discern that, that makes us really incoherent and not able to understand who's right and who's wrong. Personally, I have never, ever in my life feared that a Jewish person was going to be a problem in our country of Canada and be someone who's, I have been concerned about radical Islam. I have been concerned about the extremists. I am concerned when our brothers and sisters in Canada, as Canadians, do not understand or see who the people that have a problem are. That is of grave concern. And when we look at this recent assault again with Iran joining forces, getting involved, there's numerous things that can do. And Israel has a big decision to make about how going forward they will respond to these acts of vicious attack. Because if they do not respond strongly, a perpetrator, a bully, a psychopath will do it again. That's what they do.
The thing is, Israel has to stop everyone. They only have to
Put on your mic, that's a good point.
Israel has to stop every single attack, every missile, every terrorist, but they only have to get one in to cause damage. One missile gets through, it hits a hospital, or one terrorist gets into a pizza parlor and kills 10 people. Mm-hmm. Israel has to stop every single person. They only have to get one person in of all the people they're sending. So Israel has a much harder
has a much harder job.
Yeah, they have to stop every single one.
Yeah, and all the attacks are coming from everywhere. But Israel's capability militarily is amazing. And they, they get accused of, oh, you're taking out all of these people that are, they're just civilians. But that's because Hezbollah, Hamas, they use civilians as their cover. And so when someone dies, then they use that as the propaganda. Oh, you're killing people. But they will put their main leaders, and we've seen it recently where they'll have, a preschool or something like that, or in the basement of a hospital. And so what Israel generally does is lets them know, well, we're going to be attacking here and here. Get your civilians out. Because I don't actually think they have an interest in killing the civilians, but they will. And with Iran, they have capabilities of causing grave damage to some of their structure there. And that's what they would be going after. So I just admire the way that there's two different ways of thinking when you're at war. Israel always not wanting to harm the civilians. All of those blasts from Iran last night were aimed at civilians this last weekend. They were aimed at civilians. There was no trying to protect the civilians. They were aimed at wherever they land. That is not what Israel does. And so as we head towards these times, I was speaking with a pastor this morning, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, there's the war with Gog and Magog. And these are two countries not named by today's, many people think that it's Russia, Turkey, or, it's Iran, or, they have different things about who they think Gog and Magog is. But basically, it's a war to end all wars. It is the war. It is the, great apocalypse. And it's getting closer to looking like what happens is that Israel ends up alone with everybody pretty much against them. And then God shows up with a very powerful victory, which somehow they get. So I believe the word of God because everything's coming true. Everything. We've got the red heifers that are in place. So far, they've got, I think, still 2 or 3 red heifers that can be sacrificed. And the Jews are heading into doing the sacrifice. Why would they do that? To cleanse the temple, to cleanse the place where they are going to be building the temple, the third temple. Some people say there's no need to build the third temple because different aspects of the terrain looks like that would fulfill the prophetic word about a third temple. Israel is always, at a disadvantage because they are surrounded by enemies on all sides. And thank goodness, I think recently some of those countries actually have come to the side of standing with the Jews, which means we're not at Ezekiel 38 and 39 yet. Oh, we're not there yet. My website is Laura-Lynn.tv. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you so much for the support that you show us and share with us, those of you that are willing to stand with us as we stand with a biblical perspective on modern day events. And as we try to seek to break through, bring you good information about what is going on in the world and bring you things that can be helpful. I appreciate it so much. And if you can support us for $20 or more per month, I want to send you a copy of my book, Relentless Redemption. And that was the story that I was talking about earlier with my guest. Appreciate it so much. If you're able to send a one-time gift or, become a monthly member for any amount. It could be even less than $20, but for $20 or more, you get the book. Many of you also like to use e-transfer. It's getting easier and easier. I just talked to an 83-year-old lady who just learned how to do e-transfer. And it's not that hard. And that should go to Laura-Lynn Live at pm.me. Also, we have snail mail. Laura-Lynn Live at pm.me. And snail mail, you can send to Box 48184, Queensboro, New Westminster, BC, V3M0A7. God bless you for that. We appreciate it. And did we have that one clip, JT? I'm just remembering that one clip on about how close are we to a monetary meltdown. I've been watching a couple of podcasts on.
11 minutes long.
Oh, the whole thing? Can we just play 2 minutes of it? Or do you have it?
I haven't.
Oh, sure. Let's just play a couple minutes because the people that are in the know are actually saying that we're at a place financially, economically we've never been at. And I want them to share their perspective. Just hang tight. This is good.
Let's start with a high-level overview of where our world is headed. Matthew, I've spoken to you 2 months ago in Vancouver live. People can check out that interview down below. I'll put a link in the description. And you were telling me how a monetary reset is happening. So for those of us who haven't seen that interview, let's start with that. What do you mean by that? What does that look like?
Well, I think I'd start with the 30,000-foot observation that, we are having a debt crisis, which means a currency crisis. The ripple effects of debt affect literally every asset class and every kind of conversation theme John and I can talk about with you today. I mean, when you look at the ripple effects of debt and you look at the facts of equities and bonds, the recession discussion, the currency issues, the inflation issues, the deflation debate, labor markets, oil, all of these things, and of course, gold, trigger off or flow down from this debt crisis, this unprecedented reality. And good journalism is often very boring, just like hard economics are often very boring. But these numbers that we're looking at, and John can confirm and have his own views on, I'm sure is very similar. Keep it simple, stupid, because I keep saying the simple is very stupid and the stupid is very simple. When you have 120% plus debt to GDP at the home of the world reserve currency, is 7% deficit to GDP, when you've got a congressional budget office pushing for another 20 trillion of treasury issuance in the next 10 years, when you've got a net international investment position that's negative 65, when you've got, as Gunlak said, 212 trillion in unfunded liabilities and 190 trillion in assets, that's a banana republic balance sheet. When our Fed balance sheet has gone from 17 trillion to 34 trillion in a decade, and when we have $1 trillion in new deficits every 100 days, these things are extraordinary. And although they may seem like numbers on a screen or just data points that we throw out there, they become abstractions. But I think, as John and I can talk about in more detail, the implications of these unprecedented debt levels, these unsustainable debt levels, obviously affect the risk asset markets. Obviously, they affect the credit markets and bond markets, in particular currency markets, and all of that affects the U.S. dollar. And of course, that impacts precious metals in general and gold and silver in particular. So that's my opening thought. The debt is the key stone in the pond, and the ripple effects are everywhere in the macro scene.
John, can you?
Hopefully we're going to be able to put that in the description so you can see the whole thing. What he's painting there is a pretty bad picture, and further on in this, it's a North American problem. I mean, what they have happening in the United States is also affecting here. They talk about the printing of the dollars. They talk about gold and silver, how important that is to back. And Sun City Silver is who we recommend if you want to get your dollars into somewhere safer than just leaving, money in the bank. But what we're looking at right now is they're basically describing a scenario in which we don't have the backup that we always had. We always had a bailout program. We always had a way to kind of fix it if it goes really, really wrong. And we're not seeing that any longer. The concern from these economists and experts in their field is that we've come to a brand new place where it could happen at any time. And they go into a discussion, which we don't have time to go into today, but when is that? And it's like the signs are so imminent that it could happen on any given day where there's a crash, a fall. What does it look like? What does it look like for money in the bank, for the stock market, for real estate? They're describing some very perilous things. Interestingly, JT was showing me something this last weekend where we've got all kinds of real estate organizations, right, predicting that it's going to go up, that real estate's going to go up. And no one's really buying right now. And all I see, because I like to, read reports and, so-and-so, like a lot of people have been dropping their prices because no one's buying at the regular prices. I also have to say that if you look across the United States and Canada, people have just been really allowing real estate to go up like this, and everybody's thinking, we can't afford it. We're, now inflation's super high. Our grocery bill just got $300 to $500 more. And I was driving on the highway, and I actually took photos of these crazy tent camps that are going up underneath the overpasses. And I've told you about them before, but I wanted to actually get the pictures, and I haven't got them to JT in enough time. So we'll do that for another day. But people are living in tents, and the tents now, where we've been seeing these little tent camps along Highway 1, now they've got about 4 or 5 more tents. I mean, it starts sort of at the lowest rung that can't afford for groceries to be $20 more. Then it's to the next group where, dad's working super hard to keep mom at home with the kids and have a nice family. And all of a sudden they can't afford $300 to $500 more per month on groceries. That's just groceries, never mind what's happening with gas, right? And I was watching another little clip of somebody saying that most people, oh no, this was at church yesterday. The pastor was saying that most people can't afford a $400 extra burden thrown in to their budget. And that's not everyone, but a lot of people are at that place. And now, I mean, it's so incredibly disturbing. And our prime minister wants to build homes, which are going to go to a whole bunch of people, but someone did the math on that, and you got to build like 2,000 homes a day to house everyone that's being allowed in. So that's not happening, because you can't build a home. You can't build 2,000 homes in a day. And the amount needed is just way over what the possibility is of putting it in. So we're in a very dire situation, and we highly recommend you get gold and silver, invest in that, take your money out of the bank and get it into gold and silver, because on a day when that money is suddenly deemed, not worth the paper it's printed on, gold and silver is still valuable. And it always has been, and it will retain its value. Better to have, let's say you got $3,000 that you've put away and you're saving it for a rainy day. I would say $3,000 in gold and silver, that's probably, 1 gold coin and a few silver coins. And that's a better idea to have on hand for a rainy day, because you can take that into any one of these places. They're all over the place. They take gold and silver. It's currency. It's currency, but it has weight, while the dollar has nothing. Like, do they think we're stupid? I don't know. Something bad is going on. And then if you watch Biden and Trudeau, what they're doing is constantly spending money. It's all the time that you see a new article that they're giving millions or billions of dollars. Donate, oh yes, we just, put this in. I can't wait to see the budget, isn't it? I think it's tomorrow, the budget. Chrystia Freeland, I think it's April 16th, has to have that budget out. Can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Hey, I wonder if it's got a little shoe category there for her. Isn't that cool? She's really into the shoes right now, JT. And I think that that's very special. She should be allowed to be. Okay, I'm going to leave you with this, because in all of this very bad news, I want you to know something. That the Lord says that we can have perfect peace. And I do. I don't know if you don't sleep at night, but I sleep really well. Sometimes I have let you know that I'll have a bit of insomnia, but I'm never tired the next day, because I go and I listen to Bible Gateway, or, and I'm not necessarily not sleeping because of what what we're talking about these days. I think that what we're struggling to see right now is, okay, so if all of this stuff is happening, like, how are we gonna, get through? So listen to this in Isaiah 26. In that day, this song will be sung in the land of Judah. We have a strong city. God makes salvation, its walls and ramparts. Open the gates that the righteous nation may enter. The nation that keeps faith. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. Now, a very famous scripture in Christianity is, I will keep you in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on me. That's that verse right there. We don't often read the couple before that is talking about in that day when all of this calamity and all this nonsense is happening, we, the New Jerusalem. Did you know that the New Testament calls us the New Jerusalem? That we are the new, we are the engrafted children of God, adopted into his family because of what he did for us. So we don't have to worry because we are children of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We are princes and princesses under the rulership of the King of the world. And he has everything in perfect control. And how do we get that peace? You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Put your hope in God. We don't have to worry about it. We can trust God. We can trust him because he is faithful, because he has proven himself generation after generation that he is the God that you can rely on. You can go to the bank, the emotional bank, the spiritual bank, the biblical bank, and even, I dare say, the monetary bank. When you put your hope in God, when you trust him, he takes care of it. This is what verse 4 says, trust in the Lord forever. For the Lord himself is the rock eternal. He humbles those who dwell on high. He lays the lofty city low. He levels it to the ground. He casts it down to the dust. So he humbles those who dwell on high. Who might that be? The elite? Those who think that they're all that in a bag of chips? Those who think that they've got this all down? Those ones who try to hurt us through their little depopulation techniques? That's no history. That's not some sort of, made up thing. They're open and honest about it. It's no longer a conspiracy theory to say that they're doing it when they say it out loud and they tell us. It's just truth. God levels and brings to a humble position those who dwell on high. The path of the righteous, it says, is level. You, the upright, make the way of the righteous smooth. That's in verse 7. I say, let's walk in a smooth path today. God bless. See you tomorrow. You know, it's not easy to deliver the truth of what our sick world is doing. But for some of us, we feel that we have no choice. Because if we are silent about these abominable things, then we are letting evil go unchecked, and we cannot do that. For those of you wonderful people who are writing me and are sharing your encouragement, I am deeply grateful. Thank you for all the letters that you've been sending. Thank you for the donations and the support. I found out that in order to speak the truth, you have to become very, very strong. If you would go to my website at www.laura-lynn.tv, you'll find all of the ways that you can contact me. Remember, my friends, all is well. All is well. Thanks for joining me.